Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world? Take heed that no man deceive you, and ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines and pestilences. All these are the beginning of sorrows. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved.
Now the second half of our study has to do with the current events that are happening in our world today. We talked about Malachi pointing to this day of the Lord, pointing to the fact that there'll be a rescue of God's people, a separation from the chaff, and there'll be a separation of the wheat and the tares, but there's also signs of his return. And as you see in the book of Matthew, you can see on the screen there, Jesus gave signs that were specifically dealing with events that would happen in the world, events that would happen in the church, events that would happen in Jerusalem, and ultimately events that would happen in the heavens, because that's where he's coming. He's coming in the clouds. So these are the places you'll find the signs for sure in the world. When you see the wars and rumors of war, signs that will be in the world. When you see the persecution of believers, signs in the church. When you see the Jewish people coming back to restore the temple, and there's this talk about peace treaty, and talk about the coming of the sacrificial system, that's in Jerusalem. And ultimately, as we talked about in Malachi, there will be signs in the heavens, sun into darkness, the moon into blood. And remember about prophecy, it's pattern. The past teaches us about the future. Whatever happened in the past as history is related to the future, as we read about today. John the Baptist came, Elijah's going to come. In the same character and spirit, he will come again. Elijah was caught up in a whirlwind to heaven, but then Elisha stayed and continued the ministry. But after Elisha, John the Baptist. But after John the Baptist, we get Elijah back again. Patterns of prophecy. This happened, this continues to happen, and this will ultimately happen. Now, there's a final end to it. Right? It's not just going to keep repeating itself. There is a conclusion. There's an aim in which God has, and that is, of course, leading up to the day of the Lord. Now, today, some major things have been happening with the U.S., and leading up to the war, and then the many, many articles. You can find yourself in a nebulous thinking today, because there's so many articles related to, will the U.S. go to war? Will they go to war with China, Iran, North Korea? And the answer is yes. To all of them, new reports have come out that there are so much threats, especially from China and Russia, that the U.S. is really preparing for war. And that could be quite scary to think about it. But the reality is China and Russia have been working on some very difficult things, I think, for people to really understand, is they've been manipulating what they call geoengineering, manipulating the weather patterns to really bring an impact upon satellites, upon communications, upon any kind of activity that has to do with basically electromagnetic fields. Russia and China have been working very hard to manipulate basically the atmosphere so that it could actually affect our satellites, our communication, our GPS. And if we don't think it's true, even Fox had an interesting video on it. I'm just going to play it for just a few minutes. It's not very long, talking about the very thing that China and Russia have been dealing with, social engineering, probably social engineering for sure, but geoengineering. Now let's take a look.
Top story, the intrusion by Russia and China into the Western Hemisphere, and it's being roundly ignored by the left-wing media, Congress, the President's national security team, at least publicly. Russia has taken the bold step announcing it plans to establish its first ever military base in the Caribbean Sea, just off the coast of Venezuela, only 1,350 miles from the Florida Keys. At this installation, Russia planning to keep nuclear-capable bombers, the same bombers that overflew the Caribbean last week with a Venezuelan Air Force. As Russia plans for a base in this hemisphere, China's 2021 agreed takeover of Israel's largest port, Haifa, may squeeze the United States Navy out of the port, which routinely hosts U.S. naval ships and drills. According to the Jerusalem Post, U.S. defense officials privately concerned that, quote, sensitive infrastructure matters haven't been properly vetted by Israel's full national security cabinet prior to approval. And let's not overlook the united efforts of both China and Russia when it comes to our national security. According to new reports, those two countries are working together on experiments to modify the atmosphere, which could turn weather into weapons, creating natural disasters such as hurricanes and earthquakes. That's the goal. The frequencies generated by these weapons would also affect human brain function. And what may be most concerning to the Government Accountability Office, the United States tonight is unable to defend against Russia and Chinese hypersonic weapons. The report finding, quote, China and Russia pursuing hypersonic weapons because of their speed, altitude, and maneuverability, which may defeat most missile defense systems, and they may be used to improve long-range, conventional, and nuclear strike capabilities. And these are the chilling words. There are no existing countermeasures in the U.S. arsenal. Joining us tonight, retired four-star general, Fox Business Chief Strategic.
Goes on to interview a general regarding the things that you just heard. They're very concerning things regarding Russia and China working together, not only in geoengineering and trying to control the weather, which is something that many countries have done this for quite some time already. People often diffuse it by talking about chemtrails and things like that, but we're talking about the real thing. We're talking about the geoengineering of manipulating weathers for the purposes of war. They've done this for some time. We've done this for some time as well. But the reality of it is the U.S. is very concerned on the basis that China and Russia are working together for basically establishing their own dominance against the Western world. What's interesting about this and what's fascinating is the recent article that has come out and actually came out today, that the U.S. is ordering troops out of Syria. They're going to be leaving